Remember, this is my father speaking, through her. My wife is always after me to go huckleberry picking. Every year, it's the same thing. I wonder when the huckleberries will be ripe. It would be wonderful to have some to freeze this year for pies. There's nothing more delicious than a huckleberry pie. Now, I have no quarrel with that statement. I am prairie born and bred, and as a boy went picking choke cherries, pin cherries, and Saskatoons. But the term huckleberry meant little to me until I moved to BC, except to conjure up vague recollections of Mark Twain and his works. My wife comes from coastal BC, where huckleberries are small and bright red, slightly translucent, and appreciated only by the very young. So we were both taken by surprise when introduced to the huckleberries of the BC interior, dark red or purplish, as juicy as cherries, with a tang that is unique. I am usually persuaded to set out picking. By myself, that is, so I can rise at dawn and get it over with before the heat of the day. This year, however, my wife had a different idea. Let's go to Green City, she suggested. I hear you can drive right up into the hills on an old mining road and then get out of the car and just start picking. We can all go. The children will enjoy it too. Probably the Blunts would go along and we could have a picnic. The DeWitts went up there 3 times last week and Mabel DeWitt canned 39 jars. She says she's been going there for years and the berries are huge. Well, it sounded good, and I had to admit that for once it would be nice to get huckleberries without climbing the mountain behind the water tower. It isn't an easy climb for one of my slightly advancing years and rapidly expanding waistline. Did my father approve of that? What sort of road is it? I asked. Well, you know, my wife said, it's really not a very good road, Mabel told me, but they've been going up there for years. Now, it is some time since I left my Saskatchewan home, but I've never got used to the casual way in which native-born interior folk discuss local roads. It's always a mastery of understatement. The merest cowpath edging a precipice can hardly be said to alarm these sturdy souls. If you meet one of them after a springtime dash across the province in his late model car, now caked with mud, and ask about the condition of the road, the Cascades, the Monashee perhaps, you'll receive inevitably this reply. Well, it's not really a very good road, you know. In spite of my doubts, we set out Saturday morning. Not as bright and early as I'd planned, but it's difficult to get the family to shift into gear before 10 a.m. Off we went, and the day was not too hot. We found the road, and it started off well enough. A cheery lad with pencil and official-looking notebook stopped us after the turnoff and took our name and license number. He was, we decided, the forest ranger, and we were pleased to see the government was keeping track of possibly careless people entering the woods. He did not prove a mine of information, however. We asked, is this the way to Green City? And how far is it till we find huckleberries? And how is the road further on? To all of which questions the response was, I really can't tell you. I've just been put on this job today. Still, it gave us a nice safe feeling to think he knew where we were and would do something if we failed to emerge in a reasonable time. This safe feeling proved to be unfounded. He did not appear on our return trip to sign us out of the area. We started to climb. At first it wasn't too bad, but by the time we reached the fork and took the turnoff, as indicated, the road had begun to narrow and twist and wind, here and there crossed by a small stream, or laced with a series of mud puddles. There were nasty, jagged rock outcroppings, and in places the splintery remains of an old corduroy road shoved through. Our friends the Blunts were right behind in their 38 Dodge. Dolly Blunt doesn't care for roads of this caliber any more than my wife does, and I pondered stopping to inquire whether they wanted to turn around and go back. This idea was blocked by the complete lack of any spot to pass another car, let alone to turn. The road became narrower and more precipitous. Every so often we crossed a tumbling stream on a bridge that looked as if it might soon be tumbling too. Parts of the road continued to be very wet, having been taken over by small streams, uncertain of their rightful bed. But more grueling were the spots where fill had been added in the form of jagged, broken rock, reminiscent of the mine we were supposedly approaching. At such points I shuddered a little for the undercarriage of little Jeeves, our Austin. Meanwhile, my wife sat in tense silence, except for the occasional hiss of indrawn breath or a subdued shriek. Don't go so near the edge! To which I'd snarlingly returned, just relax, dear. As long as we're in the ruts, we can't possibly go over the edge. Why don't you just close your eyes? Meanwhile, I was looking for a place to park, but such few widenings as occurred were occupied by cars or trucks belonging to pickers and facing in the opposite direction, I noted. So there must be a place to turn around somewhere. Mabel DeWitt, said my wife between clenched teeth, said they drove in about 8 miles. I was sure we traveled at least 18. And there, they just got out of the car and picked. I made a memorandum of what I would say to the DeWitts. Were we lucky enough to get out of this alive? At this point, we reached a spot where the road widened somewhat, and I indicated to George Blunt, whose wife was glaring at me ominously while clasping the youngest Blunt convulsively to her bosom, that we could turn the cars around here and park. Both women removed the children from the vehicles while this was accomplished. I don't want to lose all of you, said my wife dramatically. The huckleberry bushes were there all right, directly above us on the dusty hillside. Some of the children clambered up and began picking immediately, releasing occasional showers of dirt and stones to the spot where we were attempting to set up a playpen to accommodate baby Blunt. Having looked in vain for the place I could just get out and pick, I struggled somewhat breathlessly up after the kids. I had to admit that the berries were lush and plentiful, although I felt that Mabel DeWitt's remarks had oversimplified the whole situation to the point of dishonesty. The scenery, too, was spectacular now that I dared look at it. There goes the road over the 5th summit, said George, pointing across the valley. I looked and shivered all over again. I had no wish to go farther along that road. It was a mere gash, climbing high around a barren peak. Where did it go, I wondered, and where was Green City, or the abandoned mine itself? The only building we had encountered was a deserted farmhouse across the valley, boarded up and desolate. While we were eating our picnic lunch, more or less in relays and on foot because of the lack anywhere to set up a proper picnic table, a truck drove up from the other direction, loaded with boxes of berries. How is the road farther on? I asked. Well, about the same. It drops down for half a mile to a stream, a much nicer place to picnic than this, indicating our impromptu arrangements. But there's a bridge you have to cross. It's not a very good bridge. I looked at him knowingly. I could picture that bridge. My wife insisted we start home promptly at 5 p.m. She was concerned about the car. And as it turned out, she was right. Little Jeeves started up and went along amiably for a while, but finally stalled and refused to be urged further. A friendly truck driver offered to give us a push, and as we were occupying the total road space, it seemed logical to accept his offer. But it's a harrowing experience being pushed over that road, I can tell you. I expect to have nightmares about those bridges for years to come. Finally, we reached a comparatively wide spot, almost entirely underwater. The truck driver called to us apologetically to ask if we'd mind if he turned around here. He left his womenfolk picking some miles back. Unconcernedly brushing aside our profuse expressions of thanks, he left us. The road was becoming quite navigable. We coasted downhill for the remainder of the distance with only the odd push from my friend George Blunt. There was an extraordinary exhilaration in viewing the black top of the highway again. Well, we got a lot of huckleberries, and they do make the most delicious pies. And I think the Blunts have forgiven us for having suggested the expedition. At least George is speaking to me again. But I heard my wife talking to the neighbor across the fence as she was bringing in the wash last evening. Yes, there are lots up there. You can get out and pick right by the car. I canned 29 jars. Beautiful berries, too. And then, over her shoulder as she brought in the last armful of clothes. But it's not really a very good road, you know.
Thank you very much, everybody, for this appreciation. It really is a wonderful book. It's full of humor and knowledge and empathy.
Opinion.
Opinion. Lots of opinion. Exactly. So I certainly do hope that you buy a copy, and Dodi, you're ready to sign copies?
Yes.
Okay.
My writing isn't very good, I warn you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and there's snacks over there on the table and beverages, so we hope to chat with you. Thank you.